I'm Andrew Langer in for Tony Katz today. Joining us right now, an organization that I love, the National Taxpayers Union. His name is Brandon Arnold. He's the Executive Vice President at NTU. And Brandon, okay, are we in the midst of vote-a-rama on the big, beautiful bill? What's going on up there? What are your thoughts on the OBBB?
Yeah, Andrew, and great to talk to you as always. Thanks for having me on the program here.
Thanks.
So, yeah, it's an extraordinarily busy time on Capitol. This was supposed to be the 4th of July recess where members of Congress are back in their districts, kissing babies, attending parades, and just relaxing perhaps at the beach. Instead, the Senate is in the midst of vote-a-rama, as you described, and that is basically an open amendment process, a free-for-all where members of Congress, members of the Senate can introduce any amendment that they want within certain boundaries. And so, yeah, there's literally hundreds of amendments that have been introduced. There'll be a lot more before this process is all said and done. It's going to take at least a day or two to work through all these amendments. Certainly not all of them will get votes, but many of them will. And of course, they're playing politics now. They're going to be trying, the Democrats in particular, trying to make Republicans cast really, really tough votes when it comes to Medicaid and other popular programs in order to extract as big a political price as they possibly can as the Senate Republicans move this bill along.
Well, speaking of pharmaceuticals, I love working with you guys at the National Taxpayers Union on our Coalition Against Socialized Medicine. CASM is what we call it. Say No to Socialized Medicine is the website for it. I'm hearing rumors that they may try to implement this most favored nation issue in the vote-a-rama thing. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but if you are, talk a little bit about it. Talk about what you think the prospects are, and talk about the problems therein.
Yeah, so that is one of those tricky issues where hopefully that won't make it into the bill because it's effectively importing the price controls that a lot of socialized countries utilize. When you import price controls, you import all of the bad economic repercussions that are associated with price controls. That is, you create artificial scarcity in many situations. We know price controls don't work. We don't use them even in areas where, sometimes we get frustrated with high prices, be that, when we see a spike in energy prices and gas is extraordinarily expensive, but we know better than to institute price controls because if we put them in place on gasoline, even though we would see a temporary reduction in prices, there'd be less of an incentive to drill, explore, produce more oil and bring more gasoline to market. It's the same thing with pharmaceuticals. If we institute these price controls, in the short term, we may see some benefits in form of lower prices, but in the long term, we're going to see fewer pharmaceutical products produced in this country or produced at all that'll save lives and ultimately make us a healthier, stronger country. So
today's innovative name brand pharmaceutical is a dozen years from now, the next, extraordinary generic that comes onto the marketplace. But if you don't get that innovation now, you don't get that less expensive generic 12 years from now, do you?
Absolutely. And you're talking about huge impacts on the quality of life, on just morbidity, which is people living longer. So this is literally a life or death issue. It gets wrapped up in all sorts of frustration that people have about prescription drug prices, which I completely understand. Right. But this is obviously the wrong way to approach that problem.
We're talking with Brandon Arnold. He's the Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union. NTU.org is the website. Now, Brandon, I don't know if I had teed this up with you before, but I'm teed up anyway. Brandon and I had done some work on craft beer and beer regulations in Maryland, which had some very onerous regulations and ridiculous regulations on the craft beer industry. There is a movement. I don't know how much you're tracking this, but there is a new temperance movement that seems to be taking root worldwide and is trying to influence U.S. policy. We were just talking about the MAHA movement and polling data there. What do you make of the temperance movement trying to say that there's no safe serving of alcohol in the United States?
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas where the government can keep its nose out of our business. I think adults can make adult decisions about how they consume alcohol as long as they're not hurting other people, getting in the car after they after they drink or committing any acts of violence. As long as they're keeping to themselves, I think alcohol is a reasonably safe product when used in moderation, and the government should keep its nose out of our business. They've fought this fight so many times over the years, as we've talked about in the past, with blue laws trying to prevent alcohol sales on Sundays. I think those are ridiculous laws. There are reasonable alcohol laws that need to be made to protect public safety, drunk driving, and so forth. But besides that, government's got other things it should be focused on, like keeping our nation safe from foreign threats and so forth. They can stay out of the alcohol fights and those types of cultural battles.
All right. So when all is said and done, Votorama is over. What's the one thing you guys at NTU are looking for in this big, beautiful bill? What's the most important thing we ought to be taking away from this?
I think the most important provisions are already baked into the cake, and that is, the tax policies locking in the Trump tax cuts from 2017, averting a $4 trillion plus tax hike that would be devastating for the economy. Besides that, we're looking at how ultimately this is going to play out with regard to the deficit. We are in a situation where we're pretty much in a debt crisis at this point, whether we know it or not. We should not be adding to the debt in a meaningful way. And I think there's some amendments that are going to be voted on. Rick Scott, senator from Florida, is carrying a very important one to stop states from abusing the Medicaid program to pad their own budgets. I think that's a really important bill, or amendment that could save literally hundreds of billions of dollars, depending on how it plays out exactly. And, reducing the cost of the federal government, driving down the deficit while we institute really good tax policy. That's kind of the sweet spot where we need to be. Unfortunately, the sausage making process can be unpredictable and often takes good bills and makes them not so good, to put it modestly.
Well, there you go. So when do you think? Do you think they're going to get it done by July 4th?
I think there's a good chance. Honestly, I'm more worried about House passage than I am about Senate passage at this point, but both could go in any direction. I think this Rick Scott amendment is really important to appease the very valid concerns of fiscal hawks in the Senate. There are fewer fiscal hawks in the Senate than there are in the House. And if they tick off those folks that are really deficit-minded in the House, then we could be looking at a really challenging vote over the next few days leading into the 4th.
Well, there you go. Brandon Arnold, how do folks find out more about the good work you guys are doing at the National Taxpayers Union?
Check out our website, ntu.org, for National Taxpayers Union. And, of course, we're on all the social media platforms you'd expect.
Brandon Arnold, listen, thank you so very much for joining us today, my friend.
Always a pleasure, Andrew.
That's Brandon Arnold. He's the Executive Vice President with the National Taxpayers Union. And check them out, ntu.org.